I've made a few knives over the years here on YouTube, and I've also made a couple of interesting ways to keep them sharp. The first is the ever popular pull-through type that I made from 2 carbide teeth from an old saw blade, and the second, which is also a pull-through type, but made from stones that are fingered together. The 3D printed one that you see here is the first design that I came up with. It's kind of interesting in that it holds the knife blade at a 90-degree angle, and then you slide the stone back and forth on either side of it at the correct sharpening angle. The problem with this, of course, is that it doesn't use the whole surface of the stone. In this case, a credit card sized diamond plate. So I went back to the drawing board and I more or less copied a retail design for the next one. And those are the parts that you see printing here. The way this one works is it clamps the blade in a level position, and then you slide the sharpening stone back and forth, guided by a bar at the correct sharpening angle. And of course, it's fully adjustable. Now to assemble the parts, I need to rough them up a little bit because glue will stick better. And to glue this screw together, I'm going to start the nut on here, and then I'm going to open up the other end and squeeze a little super glue in there and then hold that closed in line. And of course, with the nut being on there, it'll hold the threads in line as well. And then when that dries, I can take the nut off again and open up that end and squeeze a little bit of glue down in there as well. I made this part so that it lines up with these dowels, and they don't have to be glued in, they're just there for alignment. And then what I'm doing right here is I'm gluing on a thin piece of rubber. This is actually rubber inner tube from a bicycle, and that'll help grip the knife blade. I didn't try it without this, but I think this is more or less optional. And these two parts that I'm calling the jaws that grip the knife blade go in that frame and are held in by axles that are also 3D printed. And then this part here makes it so that those jaws clamp tightly together. It's a wedge-shaped piece that screw that I put together screws into. I want to get a little bit of grease on the screw and also on the wedge part so that it operates smoothly. And then I can put the other axle in, and then to hold those in place, I'm just going to squeeze in a little super glue, and I'll do the same with this retainer that holds the screw in place as well. While I was doing this, of course, it occurred to me that maybe I should make this out of wood as well, because I think that all of the parts that I made here from 3D printing can be made with wood. So I went out to the shop and I grabbed some scrap wood. This is hard maple, and I'm going to use that to make the jaws. This is another 3D printed tool that I designed and made. It's a mini adjustable square with an accurate scale on there as well. So I've got the two jaws laid out, and now I need to drill the pivot holes, and I'm going to use my bandsaw to cut those two parts out after those holes are drilled. And clean it up on the belt sander. Now these small wedges that I'm cutting here will glue onto the jaws to make them ramp, so that when the clamp nut is tightened, it pushes on those ramps and forces the jaws together to clamp onto the knife blade. And speaking of the nut, that's next. I've got a small piece of the same maple, and I'm going to drill a 1/4-inch hole in for the screw, and then I'm going to tap the threads directly in this. And here I'm trying to hold out my fingers. It's a little hard, but we'll get there. It would be better, of course, to clamp it in a vise or hold it with a pair of pliers. Anyway, this is a 5/16 inch tap. I'm using a 5/16 inch threaded rod for the screw. And now I need to shape that nut so that it's ramped at the same angle as those wedges that I glued onto the jaws. And you can see how that works right here. Now for the frame that the wedges go in, I've got more holes to drill, pivot holes and screw holes. And I also need to make some cuts on the bandsaw and do some cleaning up on the belt sander. And here's the way it goes together. You can see how these jaws open and close, and then that nut goes in there, but this appears to be a little bit too tight. So I'm going to mark it on both sides and sand a little bit more off to make it a little bit looser. And now here's the screw that I'm using to tighten the jaws, and you can see how that works. It's going to have a nut on one end and a knob on the other end. And I'm just going to temporarily put nuts on so that I'll use that as the clamp to clamp the part that fits into the body of the sharpener so that this thing can be taken out and flipped over. Now I need to take it apart again and do some final sanding on it. And then I want to get those joints reinforced where the frame attaches to that part that goes in the body. And drill out 5 32 inch holes and put in some fancy walnut dowels to not only add strength but also make it look pretty. Now, speaking of the body, I'm going to grab another scrap of hardwood. This is ash, and I'm going to lay out where I need to make the cuts. I'm going to do most of these cuts on the bandsaw, but I need to do some prep first. I'm going to drill a large hole where that thing fits in for the frame that holds the blade. So that I'll remove most of the material with the drill bit, and that way I'll have more room to maneuver the bandsaw blade. And I also want to drill 4 holes on the corners of the big opening. Now to get the bandsaw blade in, I'm going to make a straight cut that I'll later fill. And then here are the pieces that I'm going to use to close up that gap. And I get that clamped up and let it dry for about an hour. In the meantime, I took the frame part out and I sprayed on 3 coats of finish so that everything gets finished while I'm making it. And now I'm putting the jaws in and the pivots for the jaws and getting those glued in. And then here's the tightening screw, or the clamping screw. And to lock the nuts in place, I'm just using super glue. And then for the knobs, I'm going to be using a piece of cherry, and I'm cutting those out to begin with a hole saw on my drill press. And then I'll smooth those on the belt sander before tapping out the holes, because they need to be tapped. And then I can thread that on a piece of threaded rod and use that to turn it against that belt, make it nice and smooth. And then once again, I'll use super glue to hold that onto the threaded rod. The glue dried on the body in the meantime, and I'm going to do some sanding on that, round off the top corners, and then sand the faces, make it all smooth. And as you can see here, I've actually taken it out and I've sprayed on some finish. And what I'm doing now is I'm drilling the hole for the adjustment screw for the angle. And I made the adjustment screw for the angle, same as I did the other one, and finished it in the same way. Now the part that I'm cutting out here is the angle adjustment block. Once again, I need to drill and tap a hole down through that. And I'm going to do that while it's still big so I can hold on to it. And then I can cut it to the right length on the table saw. And I've also got to cut a slot in here wide enough for a 1/2 inch washer. And then I can do the rest of the shaping on this. It needs clearance on the sides at 45 degrees. And I'm going to remove that material on the belt sander again. I don't have to do this, but I think it's going to look better. I'm going to grind the 1/2 inch washer so that it's the same width as that block. Now the piece that I have here is the sharpening stone that I'm going to make. It's another scrap of hardwood. This is actually mahogany. I cut it to size, and then I need finger grips on the side, so I'm going to do that on a table saw using the cove cut method. And the guide bar is just a piece of 1/2 inch dowel, so I'll drill a 1/2 inch hole centered on the end. Now here's the adjusting screw going in, and then that adjustment block goes in next. That's threads onto that rod. And then the nut that you see here keeps the threaded rod from coming back out again. And once again, I'll use some super glue to lock that in place. The sharpener needs to be on something, a base, of course. So I grabbed another scrap of ash, and I'll cut it down to size, and then I'll adjust my saw to 45 degrees so I can chamfer all of the edges, just to make it look better. And now here's the stone. I've got some double-sided tape, and this first side is a medium grit. This is actually a 2-inch grinding belt, cut to length. And then the other side will be extra fine. Once again, a 2-inch grinding belt, cut to length. To assemble the tower to the base, I'm going to glue it in place first with super glue, and that'll hold it nice and tight until I can get some screws put in there from the bottom. So that finishes the wooden version. We can go back to the 3D printed one, and here I'm printing more parts for it. And then you can see some other parts here as well, including the base. And the base and the tower fit together with a sliding dovetail. And you can see that this goes together in a very similar way to the wooden version, other than I didn't have to actually make anything here. The printer did it all. And I didn't have to finish anything here because the plastic is already this color all the way through. And all I need to do is get parts assembled. Now this is the holder for the sharpening plate, that diamond plate I was using in the first sharpener, and 2 rare earth magnets hold the plate in place. And you can see I've got a knife in the holder to test out, and you can see how it adjusts, and you can see how easy it is to use. Once you get one side done, all you need to do is pull it out, flip it over, and do the other side. And it will be at exactly the same angle. And then this plate has 2 grits, 300 grit on one side and 600 on the other side, so you can get a really fine grind. And in no time at all, you can get a really super sharp edge that you don't have to do anything else with. And the sharpener will also handle larger knives. This is an 8-inch kitchen knife that I've got here. And once again, you can see you just flip it over and sharpen the other edge. And of course, the wooden version works the same way. The knife that I'm sharpening here is notoriously hard to sharpen. I've never been able to get a good edge on this, so this should be a good test. I'm starting with the coarse side of the stone first, and then I'll flip it over and use the fine side. And yes, absolutely razor sharp. Now I got one bonus thing I want to show you here, and this is what I'm calling a stropping stick. This is actually a piece of hickory flooring, and I've cut it into a rough dowel. It's a 1/2 inch in diameter, and I'm going to embed it with this honing compound, the green stuff that you see me rubbing on here. And you can use this in a very similar way to a sharpening steel, except you're stropping it. And what this does is it actually polishes the edge. Now it can be difficult to get that green stuff off, so it's a good idea to have another stick that's clean and use that to strop as well, and that'll just wipe that green stuff off. Just going to use it in the same way as I use the stropping stick, except this is to clean it off. Well, there you have it, a professional grade knife sharpener made 2 ways, the easy way and the hard way. And here's a reminder that I post my 3D print files, including the one for this sharpener, for my supporters on Patreon and locals. And to get there, there are links in the description of this video.